Okay, so let's get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to AP Biology. I'm Anmol. I'll be your teacher, and the other one is Venkatesh. He'll be our other teacher. So we're most likely going to alternate, or we'll both be here. We'll pretty much just pick up where each of us left off. So one thing I want to get started with is just a question for you guys. And that is, how many of you guys are planning to take the AP Biology exam this year? You can just message me in chat. Is no one here planning to take the exam? Okay, I guess so then. So in that case, I mean, we'll still just go over all of the material. You guys should think about taking the exam because we hope to provide like a comprehensive review of everything you need to know. So after this course, you guys should know enough to take the exam and get a 5. Me and Venkatesh both have gotten 5s, so we know what to teach you guys. So a little bit about me. I'm really into biology and competitions. I did USABO, or the Biology Olympiad, and I placed in the top 100 in the country. So yeah, so I have a lot of experience with competition biology, and as I said, I've also taken the exam and gotten 5. So Venkatesh, if you want to tell a little bit about yourself too.
Yeah. So I haven't been able to get into any biology competitions. I just haven't had the opportunity to. But I took AP biology last year when I was a sophomore. And I really enjoyed the class, and I ended up getting a 5.
Okay. If your school district doesn't allow you to take the exam, one thing you can do is you can ask other school districts to allow you to take it. So I took my exam like last year, and I wasn't like technically I wasn't allowed to take it at my school. I had to take it at another school. So you can always reach out to other school districts and ask them if you can be allowed to take it. I know that there's a lot of schools out there that will let you do that. So that's an option if you want to take the exam, but your school district doesn't allow it. Okay, so if that's, and there's no more questions about us, or if there's anything like that, we'll just get started with the presentation. Okay, so we're going to start with introduction. What is biology? So biology is just the study of life. Um, so overall, biologists try to figure out, how living things work and how living things interact. So this kind of introduction slide is going to introduce us to a lot of major themes in biology that you're going to see over and over again when we talk about different areas in biology. So if we talk about like biochemistry, you're going to see these things. And if we talk about like genetics, or if we talk about human physiology, you're going to continue to see these themes over and over again. So life in a nutshell is pretty much, it's recognized by what living things do. So there's a lot of characteristics of living things, and these are the ones. There's regulation, energy processing, growth, development, reproduction, response to the environment, and evolutionary adaptation and order. So a living thing will have all of these characteristics, and you'll see in its behavior that it kind of exhibits all of these characteristics. So for order, you can see the sunflower, the seeds of the sunflower arranged in an orderly fashion. Evolutionary adaptation, the seahorse is camouflaged into the plant, so it can hide from predators. Response to the environment, the Venus flytrap like surrounds, or when it senses that a fly is inside its, I guess you could say its mouth, it closes it so it can digest the fly. Reproduction, we have to reproduce to keep our species alive. growth and development, an organism starts out very, very small and grows into very, very, or compared to what it was as a baby, organisms grow a lot. Energy processing, here just a hummingbird or a type of bird is using a flower and its nectar for energy. And regulation, so a hare or rabbit has its ears and is using its ears to give off heat through dilated blood vessels. Okay, so as I was saying, there are many themes in biology that you'll see again and again. So it helps us to organize biological information, and contrary to popular belief, biology is more than just memorizing a bunch of details and facts, and it's more about connecting things you see in different forms of biology to create like a picture of biology. So evolution is one of the overarching themes of biology. So when we think about what species do and what organisms do in terms of evolution, kind of everything fits in together. So evolution, what it tries to do in a nutshell is it tries to bring out like the best in an organism. So that's why when we look at humans and we look at any of these organisms, they're so advanced and yet they're so simple in the sense that everything they have evolved to do is maximize for efficiency. So that's why when we look at biology, we say that evolution is kind of the driving force behind what makes biology biology. So everything that we see on Earth, every living thing, is just a descendant of a common ancestor. So another theme is that new properties emerge at each level in the biological hierarchy. So pretty much what this is saying is that the sum of the parts or just the whole is greater than like each of the sum of the parts. So what I mean by that is, right, like if you have a bicycle, right, and you just take like a gear from that bicycle, that gear kind of does nothing for you. But when you put that gear with like a chain and then you put like the metal for the frame, and then you can have all of those parts, but the only way you can actually get something out of that is by putting it together. Again, the whole becomes greater than all of the parts and their uses combined. So that's why this is that theme that new properties come from when you get more and more advanced and you kind of try to build things up together, everything becomes much more advanced. So, this is a really common thing that you'll see is like the hierarchy of living things. So it starts at its most basic level at atoms, right? Atoms are your most, I guess you could say, the single most basic form of whatever you have in your organism. Then those atoms come together to form molecules, which come together to form organelles, which come together to form cells, then tissues, then organs, then organ system, then whole organisms, then populations, communities, then ecosystem, and the biosphere. So, this hierarchy of living things is really, really important. And it, again, represents that concept that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Okay. So, again, this is just going over each one. So, again, the biosphere, just to define it, is the entire Earth. Then you have ecosystems. Ecosystems, by definition, are a combination all of the living things in the area plus the non-living things. So when you study ecosystems, you study, like the trees, the forest, the animals living in the forest, the bacteria living in the forest, but you also study the water or the river's effect on them. You study the wind's effect on them. You study the sun's effect on them. That's what an ecosystem is. A community is just all of the living things in a certain area. So like if you have a forest in your backyard and you look at the trees and the deer and the plants and the foxes and the bears and you combine all those together, that is a community. Your population is just one species, but like many organisms. So like if you see a herd of hippos, I guess like in Asia or something, that is a population of hippos. Organism, single organism. Then you have an organ or an organ system. So like your kidney is an organ. Then your entire, excretory system, including like your bladder, your ureter, your kidneys, and your blood vessels, that comes together to form an organ system known as the excretory system. So that's your organ system. Then you have individual organs in that, like your kidneys or your bladder. Then you have tissues. Tissues are like specific groups of cells. So you could have like brain tissue, which is like a bunch of neurons come together to form brain tissue. Then cells. Cells are just the basic unit of life. Organelles. Organelles are kind of like the mini organs that make up cells and allow them to function. Atoms and molecules, I feel, are pretty self-explanatory. So that's the kind of hierarchy of life. So let's talk about something called emergent properties. So this is what I was talking about. This adds on to what I was saying, where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And that as you arrange and you interact parts of a system, you kind of get more. So as I said here, a functioning bicycle emerges only when all of the necessary parts connect in the correct way. So emergent properties come from combining all of the parts in the right way. So that's what emergent properties are. Now, there's another thing called reductionism. So reductionism is kind of how we study biology, or how some people will study biology. And that's the reduction of complex systems, and then you break that system into its simpler components to make it more manageable to study. So for example, if we're trying to like understand how a gene or how like a protein is being created from DNA, we're not going to try to like understand the entire system in like just by looking at it. We might try to first go into DNA and see what's going on with the molecular structure of DNA, how that is allowing us to create proteins from that DNA. So an understanding of biology balances reductionism with the study of emergent properties. So for example, new understandings come from studying the interactions of DNA with other molecules. So that's the problem with reductionism. If we just study DNA, then we won't really understand its entire picture. Like we won't actually understand how it is interacting with other systems. So examples of emergent properties. So like it really depends on what we're studying. So like going along with this DNA example, right? If we start to study just DNA, then we're not going to get the full picture of how the gene or how like proteins are made from DNA. But if we start to study, like the nucleus or the entire cell, and we start to study the ribosomes or the organelles that can make proteins, then we start to see more and more properties. We start to see things like, okay, the ribosomes are built as protein-making factories. And if we hadn't, studied them along with DNA, we would have never seen that. Or the fact that, DNA has certain enzymes that can attach to it because of its molecular structure. But if we hadn't studied the molecular structure of DNA or its binding activity, we would have never found those enzymes, and we would have never realized that enzymes can bind there. So I hope that example answers your question of emergent properties. Okay, so systems biology. Again, we're just hammering in this theme here of the whole being greater than the sum of the parts. So system biology is kind of the opposite of reductionism. We look at problems in biology as like a whole system. So the example is given here. How does a drug for blood pressure affect other organs? So, if we give a drug for blood pressure, we know that the blood pressure might go up or down. But how does this affect your brain functioning? How does this affect your liver functioning? All of these things are kind of studied in system biology. Reductionism, we would probably just study the molecular structure of that drug, So that's the difference between systems biology and reductionism. Okay, so the next theme is that organisms interact with their environments, exchanging matter and energy. So this is kind of like the biggest thing, in my opinion, that sets up living things from non-living things. And that's because when a non-living thing is like kicked, like let's say you have a rock and you kick the rock, nothing's going to happen to that rock. The rock is not going to respond to your kick. But like a plant, like some plants, when you touch them, they will recoil inwards. And that is a response to your stimulus, right? The rock cannot do something like that, but the plant can. So again, this is organisms interacting with their environment. And the next part of this is exchanging matter and energy, right? So like plants will take up water and minerals from the soil and carbon dioxide from the air, and then the tree, also release oxygen into the air, through their leaves. And then when the tree breaks down, it can form nutrients in the soil, which help other organisms. So again, that kind of interaction with their environment, where they're exchanging matter, they're giving off energy as heat. All of those things are things that living things will do, but non-living things won't. So ecosystem dynamics. So ecosystem dynamics is just like, again, going along with this theme, it's just showing how ecosystems, ecosystems are also kind of like a demonstration that living things kind of function with their environment by exchanging matter and energy. And that's because when you look at ecosystems, we see like a few like characteristics. And one of that is the flow of energy. So like, as we said, organisms exchange energy with their environment. Maybe it's giving off heat or absorbing nutrients through sunlight. So this flow of energy suggests that living things are living because they're able to exchange energy. And again, the cycling of nutrients also does this. When it comes from like plants and then it goes up to animals, then those animals die and then it goes to decomposers. All of those things where we can physically see the nutrient cycling, we can physically see the energy flowing through an ecosystem, suggest again that things are living. Again, this is just showing again the cycling of nutrients and the flow of energy throughout a system. Okay, so another thing that you should know is energy conversion. So just note that energy is never lost. So when like the sun rains down energy on us, we never really lose that energy, right? Some of it is, or the stuff that is absorbed by plants is then moved through the environment and is never lost. So like energy will flow through the ecosystem. From the plant, when the animal eats the plant, it'll get energy from that plant. When the plant does its like photosynthesis, it's going to take in some energy, give off some energy as heat, and those things kind of constitute the flow of energy through an ecosystem. Okay, another theme that's really important is that structure and function are correlated at all levels of biological organization. So we're going to see this over and over and over again, especially this theme, and it'll be like really, really apparent when we start to study biology more deeply. So they give one example here: a leaf is thin and flat, maximizing the capture of light by chloroplasts. So that's just an example of how our structure matches function. Again, wings, right? Like wings have bones that are filled with air, so therefore it makes them lighter. It has mitochondria, which are really, really efficient at making energy for the wings to fly, and then it has neurons, which kind of, or neurons are another example of how structures meaning function. They're long axons, which can like transduce signals really easily. So again, all of these things are kind of, adaptations that we have as living things that kind of promote the function that we're trying to serve, whether it be flying or making energy. Okay, so next thing is cells. Cells are just the basic units of structure and function. So the cell is the lowest level of organization. What this means is that if you were to have a living thing, it must be in the form of a cell. So like if you just have some DNA floating around, that's not a living thing because it's not a cell. Cells can carry out like all of the major themes of living things that we learned about before. Like cells can interact with their environment. They can take in energy. They have order. They can reproduce. They can grow. So all of these things cells can do, and therefore that's why they themselves are considered living things, and they're the basic unit of structure and function. Just some keynotes. We'll get into this later, but all cells are enclosed by a membrane and use DNA as their genetic information. This is just an example of a cell and it dividing. We'll get into that process later, but that's what this image is showing. Okay, so talking more about cells, we can divide cells into two types. One type of cell is a eukaryotic cell, and the other type is a prokaryotic cell. So, another thing that, biology does for us is it comes up with these like vocab terms. But a lot of these vocab terms are really easy to remember when you start to understand where they come from. So eukaryotic, like you can break it down into its Greek roots, right? Karyo, Karyo, means nucleus. So when you like karyotype is another word. Again, it is talking about something to do with the nucleus. So a eukaryotic cell, they will have a nucleus. Eu in Greek means good. So it's just like saying this cell, a eukaryotic cell, has a good nucleus. Now, by comparison, a prokaryotic cell, karyo again meaning nucleus, but pro meaning before, so it's a before nucleus cell, it never contains a nucleus because remember, it's before the nucleus came. So that's how we get the names prokaryotic and eukaryotic. They're defined by eukaryotic cells having a membrane and prokaryotic cells not having a membrane. A nucleus. Remember that eukaryotic cells, another feature of them is that they have membrane closed organelles, while prokaryotic cells do not have any membrane enclosed organelles. Prokaryotic cells are generally smaller, again, because they don't contain like membrane closed organelles and they don't contain a nucleus. So bacteria and archaea are prokaryotic, and so those are like the two domains of life that are prokaryotic, and then animalia, that domain, or wait, I forget the name, but plants, animals, fungi and protista are eukaryotic. Those are the other four that are eukaryotic. Okay, so again, this is just showing an example, right? You can see that down here we have like the nuclei, like again, or sorry, the organelles. The nucleus is in like the giant blue thing here. And you can see that the eukaryotic cell, they have a membrane, and the DNA is contained in the nucleus. Remember that we said all cells have a membrane and DNA. Prokaryotic cell, they have no organelles. They have no membrane enclosed organelles. They have DNA, but with no nucleus, and they have the outside membrane. So, and you can also see like the size comparison between them. This is pretty accurate. Like eukaryotic cells are like 10 times larger than prokaryotic cells, 10 to 100 times larger, depending on the size. So yeah, this is a comparison of the two. So another theme, continuity of life is based on DNA. Now, DNA is really, really important. It's the cell's genetic material. And what this means is it's kind of the blueprint for everything that you see in your body. Like whatever is being built is being built because of the instructions in DNA. And DNA also contains genes, and genes is what is inherited from parent to offspring. This is again another really important function of DNA. It allows us to, hand off adaptations to our offspring or hand off instructions to our offspring to help them better survive. So that's why DNA is really, really important. So DNA is broken up into something called chromosomes. I don't know if I show a picture here, but DNA is broken up into chromosomes. It's X-shaped. We'll get into a lot more about that in later lessons. Again, DNA is inherited by offspring, and DNA controls development and maintenance. So it's very, very important. So again, this is just a depiction showing how DNA will be inherited. So you have the sperm cell DNA, egg cell DNA. They come together, combine their DNA, and that's how you get your DNA from both your parents. So I think that we don't need to cover this now. I think we'll get into DNA a lot more later because I think that that's in the future lessons. We'll get to that. Okay, so this is talking a little bit about like biotechnology. So biotechnology is kind of the use of, these things like, DNA, or knowing how DNA looks to, maybe sequence the genome, if any of you have heard that term. And that, again, just means to figure out all the genes in humans, to figure out the proteins that they create, the instructions that they give, so that we can better understand ourselves. And so, a lot of advances have been made recently. something called high throughput technology, which can give us enormous amounts of data. Like the genome is like billions of base pairs long, and yet we can analyze all of it using this kind of technology. So this is called bioinformatics, which uses, computer science to process large amounts of data in biology or other fields. Okay, so another theme is that feedback systems help to regulate biological systems. So, for example, there's two types, negative feedback and positive feedback. So negative feedback is kind of telling you to stop. So let's say you're going for a run and you start to sweat a lot to give off heat. Well, once your body cools down enough and it reaches a certain temperature and there's like a ton of sweat, your body is going to give itself a negative feedback signal and tell itself to stop. So pretty much as the product accumulates, in our example, sweat, this process creates a signal which tells the body to stop producing this because we have enough. Now, a positive feedback kind of is the opposite. As that product accumulates, there's going to be, it actually tells the body to speed up and create more product. And you're going to see this in birth, actually. So when the uterus is contracting, that signal is sent to the brain, and the brain actually produces more hormone to contract the uterus even more so that the mother can push the baby out. So that is an example of positive feedback in our body. So again, this is just a diagram of it. You can see that, A is producing D, but then as D accumulates, it's going to block this step from occurring to go from A to B. Now, positive feedback is the opposite. As you produce W to Z, Z accumulates and stimulates this step so that you end up with more Z. So that's how both work. Okay. So next thing, evolution accounts for university and diversity in life. So evolution kind of, again, this is adding to the first theme that we said, but evolution kind of, in some sense, it makes everything the same and it also makes things different. So like, if you've noticed, like certain animals like have wings, like insects have wings and also birds have wings. So that has kind of created unity. Evolution has caused birds to have wings and insects to have wings independently. So that's an example of creation of unity. However, the bird wings are built differently than the insect wings, an example of diversity. Because they took different paths, although it created some unity, it also created diversity. So that's how evolution can, create unity and diversity. So how do we organize all of this diversity? How do we talk about which organisms involved from which? So 1.8 million species have been identified, and we estimate that there's actually 10 million to over 100 million species. So how do we organize this? We organize it through taxonomy. Taxonomy is the branch of biology that kind of names each of these organisms and classifies them. So the broadest unit of classification is domain. Then it's kingdoms. So the widest domain is bacteria, then it's archaea, and then you go into kingdoms, right? So kingdoms are going to be your, like plants is a kingdom, or animals is a kingdom. So that's how we kind of like organize our all of our species. So you can see, like for the black bear, we call it Ursus americanus, and that comes from the domain Eukarya, comes from the kingdom Animalia, phylum Chordata, and so on and so on. And that's how we classify this black bear into its name. So that's what the scientific name of an animal is. If you've seen this before, it's actually just the genus name and the species name. And that kind of gives us a scientific name for the animal. It's just based on Latin names. So we have three domains: domain bacteria, archaea, and eukarya are our three domains right now. So bacteria and archaea, we said were prokaryotic. Eukarya is eukaryotic organisms. So this is kind of like an example. You can see bacteria, archaea, and then the domain eukarya has four kingdoms in it: animals, plants, fungi like mushrooms, and protists like some slime molds and things like that. Okay. Okay. So again, now let's talk about some things of unity. So we just talked about how things are different, how they've kind of evolved differently, but we also have some unity. One, I don't. They do mention here that unity is evident in the cell, right? All of the cells. We said that cells are the universal basic unit of life. So all living things are made up of cells. Another thing is that DNA, because all cells are made up of DNA, DNA is the common universal genetic language for all organisms. So again, this is looking at another form of unity, which is in organelles in cells, right? So cilia of a paramecium, which is a protist, versus cilia of windpipe cells, which are human cells. So again, we're looking at protists and we're looking at humans, and we're identifying unity in one of their organelles. So again, an example of unity. So again, continuing on this theme of evolution, unity, we say that Charles Darwin is the father of evolution because he came up with the theory of natural selection. So fossils, and there's a lot of evidence out there that actually documents evolution. So the people who don't believe in evolution kind of like, there's like not much evidence supporting that there is no evolution, and there's a lot of evidence supporting that there is evolution. So again, you can see fossils. When you actually look at fossils, you can see like similar structures between organisms of the same time. You can see different structures, and you can actually see gradual evolution going or occurring. So Darwin published On the Origin of Species in 1859, and he made two main points. Species showed descent with modification. Descent with modification just means that as like you go from one generation to the next, every generation will have a small modification that over time adds up. That's how evolution kind of occurs. And so the method behind this is natural selection, which we will get to later. So again, that's just showing evolution and unity in flowers. So again, going on this theme of evolution, Darwin observed that individuals in a population have traits that vary. Many of these traits are heritable, meaning they're in DNA. It can be passed on to organisms. More offspring are produced than can survive. Competition is inevitable, and species generally suit their environment. So pretty much all of these observations are things that Darwin saw when he did his travels or did his study, and these things formed the basis of natural selection. So from these observations, he was able to figure out that organisms or individuals that are best suited to their environment are more likely to survive and reproduce, and individuals in a population will start to have more advantageous traits. So as an example, let's assume we have like a population of white and black moths. So if this population of white and black moths are, put in like a forest with just white trees, then the white moths will have a better time camouflaging, and the black moth will have a much harder time camouflaging. Now, let's say we introduce like a predator, like a bird. And so the bird is going to be able to prey on the black moths because it can easily see them compared to the white ones. So now you start to see dwindling populations in the black moths because, the birds are just eating all of them. But the white moths are able to stay camouflaged. So over time, the population becomes filled with white moths. And this is how natural selection works. You have one advantageous trait in that environment, and that ends up becoming a very prominent trait in the population because of natural selection and selective pressures. So that's what natural selection is pretty much. And this is an example, except this time with black beetles and white beetles. So as you can see, the white beetles keep on getting eaten, and the black beetles are the only ones that reproduce. So you get the tree starts to be filled with more black beetles. Okay. So the meeting is going to end in 1 minute, but we haven't covered everything that we wanted to today. So what we're going to do is just everybody leave the meeting, and then I'll just restart it again, and then everybody join back. So just I'll stop it, and then everybody join back again. Okay. Yeah, it's going to be the same meeting link. Just click the same meeting link and join back. Okay, so let's start. So we're going to continue on the discussion of natural selection. It's often evident in adaptations, and again, bat wings are an example of an adaptation. They're very light. They're very I guess you could say thin in some sense. So they're able to. It helps them to fly because it's very lightweight. So this is unity in diversity. Again, descent with modification, same theme, new example. If you look at the formula of a bat, human, horse, and whale flipper, they all actually have the same structure where you have two bones or one bone in the upper arm, then it breaks into two bones, then you have the hand. So if you look at the forellimb of the bat, it actually has the same bone structure. You can kind of see that here. It has the one bone here, and then it has that other bone here. Then it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Pretty much very similar to what what our human hand looks like. The horse leg also looks like that. Whale flipper also looks like that. And that's why they're all classified as mammals, because again, we can see these similarities in the structure. Now, fossils provide additional evidence. So when we look at the common ancestor of the bat, of the human, of the horse, of the whale, we will see this common structure present. Sorry. At the end. It won't let me exit out of this. I don't know. I think that might be the end of the presentation. Okay, give me 1 second. Okay, I figured it out. Okay, so this is the slide we left off on. That's it. All right, there we go. So continuing our discussion on natural selection, we talk about Darwin. So again, Darwin proposed natural selection. He proposed this theory, and we can represent evolution on tree-like diagrams. So these tree-like diagrams, if the next slide wants to load. So again, you can see the common ancestor, and you can also see each of the traits that evolved. So for example, here, we can see insect eaters. So that's where we get the green warbler fringe and the gray warbler fringe. Then over here, seed eaters evolved, then bud eaters evolved, then insect eaters, and then seed eaters. So you can see like each set of organisms have a different trait, but they all stem from a common ancestor. And that's how we get these trees. Again, this is just looking more closely at each of the things. Sorry, this is really slow. Okay, we don't need to do those. Okay. So now we talk about science. What is science? So science, again, we can derive it from Latin. It just means to know. Inquiries or questions is just a search for information. So there's two types of science: discovery science and hypothesis-based. Discovery science, we look and we observe, we collect data, then we analyze that data to describe natural structures and processes. Data falls into two categories. We have qualitative and quantitative. This is really important. Qualitative data is our descriptions. So when you look outside and you say, it is very windy outside, versus quantitative data, which is like the wind is 20 miles per hour northeast. That's quantitative data. It's actual numbers or recorded measurements. So this is Jane Goodall. She had observations and she had quantitative data. So you have, when you include both types of data, you can maximize your results or get the best results possible. So there's something called inductionist science. So inductive reasoning kind of draws conclusions through logical processes. So one example is repeat specific observations can lead to important generalizations. So the fact that the sun always rises in the east, when people see that day and day and day, every single day, they see the sun rising in the east, we can reason that the sun is going to rise in the east. So now we have the other type of science that we do is hypothesis-based. So we ask questions or we ask a hypothesis. And it's just a tentative answer that we have. So for example, if I want to say that increasing the length of the school day decreases the health of kids, that is a hypothesis that I make, but then I have to prove that through observation or experimentation. So examples, again, you observe that your flashlight doesn't work. You question, why does my flashlight not work? So then you can create hypotheses. The batteries are dead. The bulb is burnt out. And then you can test these hypotheses. I don't know if it mentions on the next slide. Let's probably go through each one of these. But just something to note is that you can't, like, one thing in science that we try not to do is we try not to make like supernatural claims. For example, if you see like the water moving in a river at night, you're not going to say a ghost is haunting the river, right? You may say, the wind is like reflecting off of something and then onto the water, making it move. So that could be a hypothesis. But you can't make hypotheses of things that you cannot prove using observation or experiment. So then the other type of reasoning is deductive reasoning. We talk about inductive reasoning. And this is like the if-then statement, right? If organisms are made of cells and humans are organisms, then humans are composed of cells. So this is like an if and then statement. Inductive reasoning was when you observe something over and over and over again, that you can make a conclusion, or you can make a conclusion based on that. Deductive reasoning is an if and then state, or anything in the form of that. This is again what I was saying. Hypothesis, you kind of, or something that you want to do with your hypothesis is actually make two or more hypotheses, because sometimes when you test your hypothesis, it doesn't actually work out. And what they say here is really important. Failure to falsify a hypothesis does not prove that hypothesis. So if you cannot prove that that hypothesis is wrong, that does not mean that that hypothesis is correct. So that's why it's always good to have alternate hypotheses. So again, this is something that you probably all have heard of many, many times. It's the scientific method. And the scientific method is saying, you go from observation to hypothesis and so on and so on. But in reality, like the scientific method is not kind of really what happens in the real world. Like, for example, Alexander Fleming, like when he discovered antibiotics, it's not like he observed that, fungi, kill bacteria. It was kind of more that he was doing another experiment and then he just kind of ran into this and it kind of ended up creating antibiotics. So we say that scientific model or scientific method is a model for how we do science and how people do science, but it's not necessarily what every scientist follows to make important discoveries. It's just kind of a general and idealized science. So we don't have to do this. This is just scientific inquiry. Okay, so this is important. So designing controlled experiments is important. So what is a controlled experiment? So that means we need to use control groups. When you have a controlled experiment, that means that every variable that is not the variable that you're testing is thought of and is kept the same. So we don't want to introduce confounding variables or variables that could alter our data in some sense. So for example, if we're testing if our bulb is burnt out or our battery, or let's say we're, not a bad example, let's say we're testing a plant and we're like analyzing plant growth based on the amount of sunlight a plant gets. So, we can't like keep one plant in the dark and then keep one plant in the light, but then forget to water the plant in the light so that both of the plants end up not growing. So if we do that, then we're creating this confounding variable of watering because we're not actually watering one of the plants. That's why it's very important to have controlled experiments where every variable that could have a major impact on the experiment is thought of, and there's no difference between whatever your two groups are that you're studying. So limitations of science. So again, science cannot support or falsify supernatural explanations, which we cannot directly measure. So it's very important that in science, whatever you do, whatever you observe, whatever you experiment with, the results must be repeatable. So like if you are, again, measuring that plant with sun or with light, it's very important to include a methodology when talking about your experiment so that other people can repeat the experiment and see if they get the same result as you. That's how like we kind of confirm theories. We test something over and over again to get like a very large amount of evidence, and therefore this can create a theory. So a theory is kind of a hypothesis that has been proved true. It is a little bit broader than a hypothesis. Like, for example, the theory of natural selection. Maybe Darwin's hypothesis could have been something as simple as, birds, I think that, or, birds change when put under selective pressure. That could just be his theory or his hypothesis. But then that could lead to a theory of natural selection. So that theory is very general, and it can lead to new hypotheses, and it can lead to new experiments that we can do to either prove the theory or create new theories based on that one. So models in science, models are really important because they help us experiment. Diagrams, three-dimensional objects, computer programs, mathematical equations, all can represent natural. So again, this is just a, visualization, a diagram of how the blood moves through the heart. So you can see that the blood first comes from our venous blood. That's what the blue is showing. Deoxygenated, kind of like bad blood, if you will, starts in the body, moves to the right atrium, then right ventricle, then to the lungs, and then it comes from the lungs into the left atrium, left ventricle, and then to the body. So you can kind of see like a flow here through this diagram. So that's what a model can do. So the culture of science, most scientists work in teams. Usually when you take like a biology course, you do a lot of lab work, or any science course, you'll do a lot of lab work. and you'll often be assigned lab partners, which are just people you work with. So that's why good communication is very important in science. I think we really need to do that. But one thing that we should talk about is ethical issues. So a lot of when you mix science with politics, it can create a lot of ethical issues, because when people don't report facts, science is all about facts. It's all about, testing hypotheses, testing observations, seeing if you can make reasonable deductions from observations through experiment. But when you mix science with new technology, politics, economics, and culture, you can distort science in some sense and not say the facts. And this can create ethical issues. You can spread wrong information. You can kill people. You can take people's lives. That's why it's, ethics is a big issue in science. Okay, so I think that is it. So that's the end of the slide. So now you guys should be able to briefly describe some of the themes that connect biology, distinguish among the three domains of life, and what eukaryotic, what prokaryotic cells are, and you guys should be able to talk a little bit about science, discovery science, hypotheses in science, data, reasoning, and science and technology, and ethics. So I think that's all for today's class. Yeah, this was a really long slide page, a lot of introduction. If you guys have any questions, you can ask them now. Okay, yeah, we can share these slides later.
Yeah, and if you guys look at the resources, I think it's on the page for the class, but it has links to different things. I think it has links to the slides under notes, and then there's another Google Doc that was composed of some people from my school and just overall notes on the entire textbook. So if you want to look at that, if you want to review, you can look at the slides that Anmol covered today, or you can go to the docs and look at the notes for chapter 1. And then there's also study guides, but those are for the overall next few chapters if you want to look ahead, but those will be covered in the next few classes.
Yeah. Okay, so if there are no other questions, then thank you all so much for attending, and we will see you guys next week.